Well, hello, folks out there in YouTube land. Got a big show lined up for you. Let's get right on into it. All right. Yeah, the SEC is screwed. And the coaches are starting to see it. Lane Kiffin and Eli Drinkwitz are starting to call it out. And you're going to have a lot more coaches call it out once this 9-game SEC schedule gets implemented in 2026. Now, all of this was done without the SEC receiving any significant assurances that the playoffs going to move to 16 or that the schedule is going to truly be measured by strength of schedule instead of by wins and losses. Supposedly there's been some adjustment to it, but we've not seen that in action. And when you haven't seen something in action and you've got human beings making decisions, many of which come in with their own biases and their own favorite conferences and teams, you're not going to get true fairness. Now, if we were going to a college football computer system where it was all set up on the front end, that strength of schedule and things like that were equally measured against other criteria, then it might make sense to go ahead and go to a 9-game schedule like Greg Sankey has agreed to do and pushed on the SEC. Now, if you've kept up with this, you know Greg Sankey's been wanting 9 games for several years now. And Nick Saban actually nixed the idea a couple of years ago, which upset Greg Sankey to no end. And then the other teams, of course, once Nick said no, everybody else was free to do so. And Greg got super upset about it, and then he stuck us with an identical schedule for 2 years in a row because he didn't want to bother having to work through the schedules because he was ticked off. So he pulled a spoil brat move. Greg is desperate for 9 games, and he finally got it. Now I'm going to show you where these coaches are starting to realize, oh crap, this is probably not going to work out for us. We can start out with Lane Kiffin. He declared dynasties dead in the SEC football as the league changes schedule. And here you can see where he says, in my opinion, the dynasties are over. He said, you're not going to have teams like Alabama and Georgia winning by 30 points in the conference. He said, those days are gone. A lot of that has to do with NIL, transfer portal, playing time, all of those things. I think some of that's really good. You should never have a player that's easily good enough to start somewhere sitting on a bench for years, which is what happened at Alabama and Georgia. If you can play and you're good enough, you ought to be out there on the field. As a former Division I athlete myself, sitting on the bench sucks.
This sucks more than anything that has ever sucked before.
Lane went on to say you're going to have really good teams going 8-4 because we're playing a 9-game conference schedule, including 5 on the road. The conference has never been this balanced, and it never used to have Texas and Oklahoma, 2 top 10 teams and 2 of the hardest places to play in the country. He also talks about the importance of the college football playoff to put more emphasis on team schedule or strength of schedule when deciding the 12-team playoff. He was critical last season when SMU and Indiana were selected over multiple SEC teams, including the Rebels. He said, records are burned into our heads that 11-1 and 10-2 are better than 9-3. He said, it can't be these people deciding who gets in the playoff. We've got to get back to analytics and computers. Baseball and basketball have the RPI when they take into account margin of victory, who you play, where you play, and all of that. He knows you put a bunch of human beings in a committee, and it's going to be decided by personalities and people's favorites. That's just the way humans are. And he got a dose of it last year. Eli Drinkwitz has taken it even further. He calls out the College Football Playoff Committee. He says, we have beauty pageants instead of football games. And here he is on Wake Up Barstool on X, and I'll let you hear it for yourself.
Yeah. I do love that the college basketball tradition of coaches, like not even halfway through the season, already stumping for like, we should be in the tournament or we should, like that has trickled over to college football now. It's like already starting to do the, our conference is strong, like we need this many bids. That's incredible. I love that.
You want to know why? Because college football has decided that instead of allowing, some sort of actual competition on the field to be involved, we decided, as Mike Leach completely and accurately described, we allowed a committee to decide. Yeah, a committee of people, which has always produced great results. As we can now sense, throughout the government, that committees are effective ways to make decisions. So we have beauty pageants instead of a football game. And, I talked about it at SEC Media Days. I still believe in this. We got to get back to figuring out who the best teams are on the field. I believe each conference should have play-in games and let those games decide who ultimately makes the playoffs. I think that's the best way to do it. I mean, I don't think anybody, the NFL is the most accurate model that we should all follow in professionalized sports. They play divisions, they play each other twice. You know that's the best team in that division. There's no doubt about it. And then, those teams makes the playoffs. You have 14 out of 32 teams make the playoffs. That's roughly 44%. We're talking about less than 10% in college football. We're asking fans for millions and billions of dollars to pay for players and stadiums. That's not sustainable if they don't see hope in their investment.
Yeah, Eli gets it. He's not happy that the cart was put before the horse. You need to see the college football committee actually take strength of schedule into consideration for a change before you go to 9 games if you're in the SEC, because the SEC strength of schedule is much different than the other conferences. When it comes to strength of schedule, the second best conference is obviously Big Ten. Now, before the Big Ten fans go nuts, I know there are multiple teams in the Big Ten that are just as good as any team in the SEC at the very top. I'm talking Ohio State, Penn State, Oregon, Michigan when they have Connor Stallions. Teams like that are just as good as Georgia, Alabama, Tennessee, LSU, et cetera, and so on. But you've got a bunch of teams in the Big Ten that are no good. UCLA, Northwestern, Minnesota, Wisconsin's no good anymore, all throughout that conference. I mean, if you play UCLA, that's like a scrimmage at this point. Same with Northwestern. You don't have that in the SEC. The worst teams in the SEC are Mississippi State and Vanderbilt. They're 9-1 right now. Vanderbilt's 5-0. So, yeah, that's not going to happen with the lower teams in the Big Ten. It's just not. And by the way, before we even moved to a 9-game schedule in the SEC, which I believe was quite stupid, look at the strength of schedule of the Big Ten. Last year, their average was 37.6 through 12 games. Through 12 ball games, regular season, that was their average strength of schedule. The SEC's was 10th, okay? And they're going to make the strength of schedule even tougher by going to 9 games?
You can't be serious, man. You cannot be serious!
How is this a good bargain? How could you look at that, Greg Sankey, and think, yeah, let's go to 9 games? It's absurd. And Big Ten fans, go ahead and give me grief in the comment section. I know you will.
Look at him, fellas. You crying, boy? You crying, boy? Maybe we'll go back down to McDonald's and get you a Lamburger and some French fries. How about a white?
But yeah, this is no bueno, what's happening. And by the way, the $5 million that each SEC school will get for moving to 9 games, that everybody's, oh, well, that's good money from ESPN. That is a drop in the bucket for what you're giving up. Understand, when you go to an odd number like this, you're going to lose a home game every other year for Tennessee, Mississippi State, Alabama, whoever, which means your hometown or your college hometown, which for Tennessee would be Knoxville, for Mississippi State, for example, Starkville, how much money do you think you lose for the community when you give up a home game every other year? Let me just give you an idea, just a small idea how much money that is. Tennessee bought 20,000 tickets to go down to the Mississippi State game and infiltrate their stadium. And this is one of the smallest stadiums in the SEC. Let's say those 20,000 people spent $1,000, whether it was hotels, restaurants, tickets, food, all the different things that they did and spent on, bars, etc. That's $20 million. That's just for the 20,000. You give up an entire home game, say like Knoxville, Tennessee, that fits 100,000 people, you can see that $5 million is not going to come close to covering that. It's not even going to be near it. It hurts the entire economy. Think of all the restaurants, hotels, gas stations, shops, all the businesses around that area that live off of that business. Now that all gets sucked away from them. How is that a good move financially? Over $5 million that's going to go to the university instead of going to the community. It's a terrible decision, and Greg Sankey needs to answer for that, in my opinion.
Thank you for playing. Should we or should we not follow the advice of the galactically stupid?
And again, he's done some good things. He's not a terrible commissioner. He's just, look, Tony Petitti absolutely drug him up and down the field like a rented mule on this deal. How in the world he suckered him into this is beyond me. Sitting there going, well, the Big Ten plays 9 games, and, we're not going to go to 16 unless you do. I'd have said, forget it, Tony. Look at this strength of schedule difference. I would have thrown that in his face and say, when you get anywhere near 10th, I'll be happy to move to 9. But you're at 37th. How am I going to move to 9 games? But Tony, he has some sort of special power over Greg Sankey. He just punked him like crazy.
I need your clothes, your boots, and your motorcycle.
Yeah, took his motorcycle too. Darndest thing I've ever seen. But let's see what old Greg had to say to Paul Feinbaum by going to this so early on. And this is the Paul Feinbaum show on X, talking about it.
How does this decision today affect where the league stands on the CFP expansion?
There are multiple chickens and plenty of eggs, right? So is it the chicken or the egg? Do you decide the format and then trigger your schedule off of the format? Do you decide the criteria, then follow with the schedule? Or do you take a step knowing that there's a bit of uncertainty in whatever you do? So Paul, the announcement of the strength of schedule adjustments and I think a healthier metric being used to inform decision-making, that's an element that weighed in favor of the 9-game conference schedule being implemented. I don't consider that number, that metric, that information being just a finish line. I think the discussion around strength of record, so not only how rigorous a schedule do you play, but how do you perform against that schedule? That's important to us as well, and that work is being done.
Why don't you wait and see how the committee responds to that first before you go ahead and move to the 9 games? Because now you have no leverage. You have zero leverage to move Tony Petitti to 16, even though he might not. You also don't have any additional leverage to push on the committee to move to something that's more analytical and away from the human element, which you can't count on. And you've seen that.
What I think we have to acknowledge is the CFP process has said don't lose. I don't think that's healthy for college football. And the ability to take this step to say it's more than just don't lose. It's about playing quality, high quality opponents. That being honored, yes, you have to win games. That's some of the work that needs to progress. That's where we have made some progress, but we haven't reached that perfection stage. And I'll be interested to see how the CFP selection committee continues to adapt, how the protocol continues to adapt. We then go to format. So what's the right number of teams? Last year, I think 12 was the right adjustment. I think at the time that it was made, people thought, wow, that's a lot, but 12 worked last year. 12's in place this year. We've got a short runway to adjust. Otherwise, and I'll be clear about this, I've said this in other venues and in other speaking engagements, if we don't change anything, if we can't agree to a different number, then we're at 12 and 26. That's clarity.
In other words, at least 2 SEC teams will miss the playoff in 2026 because you moved to 9 games, and there's no guarantee we're moving from 12 to 16. Either way, 2 SEC teams are going to get creaked because of this. And how much money do you lose because of that? How much does that offset the $5 million that was such a big deal? Not only does your community get creaked, but you lose out on playoff money. Stupid. Anyway, he just admitted he put the cart before the horse. He's putting a lot of faith in a committee that has proven that they're not going to take strength of schedule heavily into consideration. They may have told you they will, but they have not proven anything to you. And you went ahead and you jumped because you wanted to. That's why. He wanted it, and, he didn't care. And you've seen people do this. When they want something bad enough, they'll come up with every excuse in the world to get it. And that's what Greg Sankey did. And I've watched him for years now, and I knew he was trying to finagle a way to talk everybody into 9 games. Coaches the coaches in the SEC see it. Eli's already talked about it. So is Lane. You're going to hear many more coaches when they get screwed out of the college football playoff are going to raise hell. And I hope they all direct it towards Greg Sankey, and we get another commissioner that will actually put the SEC first, because that's his job. And I'm sorry to the other conferences, don't want to hear me say that. That is the SEC commissioner's job. Just like Tony Petitti puts the Big Ten first, and he's done a phenomenal job for the Big Ten. He'll tell you that's his job. Well, Greg Sankey doesn't see it that way. He thinks he's Lord of college football. You're not. And he's put the SEC in a very bad spot. Just a fact. So look for 2026 to be a grinder for every SEC school, and we'll get a few teams into the college football playoff, and they will be absolutely bruised and beaten by the time they get to that playoff against some very well-rested teams. Thank Greg Sankey for that. Anyway, sorry, Greg. I'm just calling you out on this. I am. At least you did something about the fake injuries of Lane Kiffin. I will give you credit for that. Took you 5 years, but you finally got off your butt and did something. So there's something to give him credit for. Anyway, if you like this content, be sure to hit that like button. Let me know. Continue to cover all these big college sports stories. If you've not subscribed, boom, boom, and boom, hit that button. Subscribe button. Won't cost you a dime. And right over here is the most recent video YouTube thinks you'll enjoy based on your viewing history. And we'll see you next time on Sports Talk Jay. I am not happy about the 9 games without getting something in return. Not happy about it.
I'll turn this damn bus around. That'll end your precious little field trip pretty damn quick, huh?